Okay, so I'm Dorothy. As Gabe mentioned, I am one of the co-founders of this community. So we're trying to launch, and build momentum in this civic tech community in Toronto. And this week, I thought I'd be a speaker as well, so I'm wearing a speaker hat, even though I basically told myself I'm a speaker. So the topic that I chose for today is citizen-led civic tech. Which I will explain what I think that means and what maybe as a community we could think that means. Just a little bit about myself. During the day I work as a project manager at Architect. I work with Russell over there. And we make, we're a digital studio, we make custom software. By night I am very active in the civic tech community, trying to push this community. I volunteer a lot with Civic Action and ELN, which is the Emerging Leaders Network. And it's a network of basically a lot of very engaged young city builders who are usually more government focused, like they come from a background of knowing policy, and or a lot of them are business people. And so I go to these events and there's like a lot of talk, not a lot of action. And then during the day, I work in the tech sector, and it's like all action, not a lot of talk. And so I felt like this is a good verge of both of those things in one community. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve. So that's a little bit about me. So I'll dive right in. So before I start like listing off citizen-led civic tech projects that I like, I thought we could take a step back and just look at what is like the definition of a civic technologist? This is kind of like a newer term, so I looked on the internet and there's no like set definition for what a civic technologist is. But basically what I did is you can piece together that it's someone who uses technology to understand and solve civic challenges. It's a very literal definition of the term civic technologist. But I ask you this question, would you say that this person is a civic technologist? So this is Harriet Tubman. She was born in 1822, died in 1913. She was an abolitionist and a badass humanitarian. For those of you who don't know, she was born into slavery and then freed like a bunch of slaves, like hundreds of them, using the Underground Railroad, which was essentially a network of like underground tunnels and safe houses, and it was basically she helped to build up an entire network of not just physical spaces, but also working with other people and communicating to work together to free like hundreds of thousands of slaves. I don't know if hundreds of thousands is the right number, but anyways, it's a lot. Essentially, so I really like her because I think the Underground Railroad is a great civic hack. She basically saw a need and decided to fulfill it by using the tools and the resources that were available to her. So I picture that as being like the technologies of her time. She used those to apply it to a problem that she saw. So I call her a civic technologist. So I think that the definition of a civic technologist needs to be elaborated a little more. So the first is it's someone who sees not only a civic problem, but like a social problem, or some kind of need in the public realm. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a problem with government or an existing system. It's just a problem that they're facing is what I think. It doesn't, essentially, a civic technologist thinks of creating things that are greater than the sum of its parts. So it's always looking at the greater good for their community. And then finally, technology can look like many things. It doesn't have to be the traditional forms of technology that we think of, like digital technologies. It could be processes, it could be other tools, it could be physical tools. So this is my intro into some cool civic tech projects that I've categorized as citizen-led. So last week, Matthew was up here talking about his favorite civic tech projects, and a lot of them had to do with civic tech projects that were helping or influencing government in some way. So there was that touch point with government. The ones that I wanted to showcase this week are more community driven, so they're not necessarily interfacing with government, but it's definitely a need that the community saw, and so they just took action and have started running with things in their own way. So the first one is time banks. So I don't know if anybody knows what a time bank is, but they're very popular in the US. They're not so popular in Canada. Essentially, time bank is a community of people that come together and they trade services or skills with each other while using time as currency. So the rule about a time bank is that every hour of someone's time is worth $1 time dollar, regardless of what that skill is. So you could have a lawyer providing legal fees. That is his hour of time is worth $1 time dollar, which is equivalent to someone else who's raking another guy's leaves or something. So it provides a very equal community, and time banks kind of came about. There was a guy, his name was Edgar Kahn. He was a lawyer and an activist and an economist in the US, and in the 80s, he was very ill and realized that he was lonely at home, and there were things that he could do, but he couldn't contribute to the economy by working. So he thought, why don't I create this alternate economy using an alternate currency which values everybody equally. So it's very popular in the US. I think traditionally, if you look up, there's been studies done on time banks and their social impact. It's usually, they've grown in areas where the government is not, doesn't provide so many public services. So my theory is in Canada, we have quite a few public services, so maybe time banks haven't been as popular or we haven't really heard of them. But in the US, they've been super popular since the 80s, 70s or 80s. My next one is more local. This one is Line 6. I don't know if you guys know, if you guys live out in Liberty Village, but this one was in the news. Sorry, you hear about it? This was in the news in the past year, and it's actually been shut down, which is unfortunate, but I think this is a great civic tech project. Basically, if anybody's ever ridden the King streetcar line out to Liberty Village, it's always crazy packed. It's impossible to get on a streetcar. It takes I don't know, I've heard an hour to travel from Liberty Village into the downtown core, which is crazy. So what two guys did is they started this startup called Line 6, which was basically a self-serve kind of public transit. So it was they would rent a bus. You would sign up and say, yes, I would like to ride Line 6 into downtown from Liberty Village, and they basically came up with an alternate public transit system, just based off of, there's a clear problem. There's a lot of people complaining about lack of transit support, and the TTC is not really stepping up to provide more services. So they took it upon themselves to just transport people on their own. I think in the end there was a bunch of issues with running an alternate transit system. Yeah, I think maybe you know more.
Yeah, I'm curious because I've worked fairly closely with Brett and Taylor, the guys who put this together, and I kind of they're political activists, or sort of political operatives, I guess. They like to sort of create campaigns that get people motivated to do things. I'm curious as to whether people think this is a good example of civic tech. It's something that's in competition with a public service, and it did motivate TTC to change its policies, but the benefit wasn't in the service that it provided explicitly. It was kind of more of a pressure campaign, I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious as to whether people think, because of its political goals, its political content, that, whether it fits in the category, I guess, or what people think of things that are.
Should we talk about that now, or do you want to leave that till the end?
Why don't we park that,
Sure.
and then we'll come back to the end. But I think that's a great topic, because I think there's always that there's so with some civic tech projects, you will reach that gray area of what is pressuring the system
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about like the political content of like certain types of civic tech projects. I mean, there's a lot of, there's clearly a lot of variance. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Thank you for keeping. Okay. This one, the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. So I actually didn't know about this one until I talked to Howard Tam the other day. This one's pretty cool. It's a group of residents and organizations who formed a community land trust, which is basically a nonprofit that's dedicated to looking out for the use of land. So in a neighborhood, so in Parkdale, they're going through a lot of changes right now. There's a lot of people moving into the community, like a lot of gentrification happening. Not that that's a bad thing, but the community organization is there to ask the question of, what do we need to keep in place? Like what kind of social or environmental considerations need to be kept in place for our community to make sure that, everybody is happy. So I thought this was a pretty neat one that doesn't involve, it involves technology in that, they collaborate using technology and maybe they probably communicate to the greater audience using technology, but they're not, a digital technology focused project. And then my last favorite one is the Danforth East Community Association. So this one's kind of similar in nature to the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust Association. So this one is, this is not the BIA of the Danforth. It's a group of engaged community members living in the Danforth area. And what they've done is they found a lot of empty storefronts or just vacant storefronts, and so they decided to take it upon themselves to start a pop-up shop service. So they actually work with landlords to say, hey, would you be interested in having a pop-up shop here? And this retailer would come in for, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 4 months, whatever works for you. And it will help to, beautify the neighborhood. You'll get some income, and at the same time, it could turn into a long-term thing. There's been a couple tenants that have now become just permanent storefronts on the Danforth. And it's completely voluntary. These people will go in, they'll paint the storefronts for the landlord, they'll clean it up, they'll take care of the insurance. So I think this is a really neat civic tech project. Again, doesn't really involve digital technology, but a good representation of people who saw a very visible problem with their community and decided to fix it. So that is it. A question to you, the audience. How do you define civic technologist? Do you consider yourself a civic technologist? I think that as we, define this community and as it grows and we start launching our own civic tech projects, we should keep in mind of what we want to get out of this community and how we want to define ourselves through the process. So that is it. Yeah, so we'll go on to
Sorry,